So welcome to the second session for the APM Planning, Monitoring and Control SIG Conference, Project Controls, but not as we know it. So this session is Punchcards to Power BI, Managing Change in the Digital Age. My name's Jay Armstrong, and I'll be presenting with my colleague Sanjay and Nithiyanantham. And we are from Logical. We are a project management and project controls consultancy, and we believe in helping our clients deliver their projects better. So a little bit about Sanjay and myself before we kick off on the presentation. My name's Jay Armstrong. I'm a principal consultant at Logical. I've got over 15 years, I think it's actually 17 years now, which is frightening how quickly the time goes, in major project delivery across various industries, including rail, water, mining, oil and gas, as well as infrastructure. I've also worked in the UK, Australia, and Canada, and I am also an active member of the Planning, Monitoring and Control SIG. I've been involved in that for the last 3 years and am currently on the SIG committee as well. And I'll hand across to Sanjay so he can introduce himself.
Thanks, Jay. My name is Sanjay Nithiyanantham. I'm also a senior consultant at Logical, and I've had over 10 years experience in major project delivery and systems engineering. So my background is in railway control systems, where I've done systems engineering and also project management, and just recently moved into the infrastructure sector, working with project controls and project management. And this spans over Australia and UK.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sanjay. So in terms of the session today, what we want to talk about is Punchcards to Power BI, Managing Change in the Digital Age. So in terms of what we'll take you through, we'll give a little bit of an introduction just to provide a little bit of context to the type of change we're talking about, and a little bit about what we mean about the digital age. And then we'll have a chat about managing change in relation to 3 key themes, which in this instance will be people, process, systems. We'll then wrap everything up at the end with a bit of a conclusion. And then, as I said, there'll be an opportunity at the back end for us to have a bit of a discussion and Q&A similar to the previous sessions. So to introduce the concept itself, usually I think it helps with this. We hear a lot of buzzwords, particularly in the project controls, project management space at the moment, about 4IR, the fourth industrial revolution, data analytics, data science, etc. You name them, there's a million buzzwords. So just to provide a little bit of context, I think it's a really important thing to recognize in this is that 4IR, or the fourth industrial revolution, in my view, is actually a continuation of something that started back with the first industrial revolution. So this actually started back in the 1700s. And it was really, I guess the key thing about this was it was when we first started to see mechanization, steam power, the weaving loom, and those sorts of things being introduced into our manufacturing processes. So first sort of shift away from heavy human labor and starting to use mechanized processes in the early days. Around the back end of in 1870, we started to see Industry 2.0, which was characterized primarily by the introduction of the assembly line, electrical energy. A few years after this, in the early 1900s, was when we started to see things like the car and automobile manufacturing plants and things starting to appear. Moving forward a little bit then into sort of our, I guess, more modern sort of history, we then start to look at Industry 3.0. And this was really characterized by the emergence of computers and electronics after the Second World War. It was also around this time that a lot of the project management theory and a lot of the, I guess, the project controls theory that we know and love today sort of started to emerge. There may be those of us on the call who remember the old school days where we used to book punch card slots to go and do our scheduling. And we'd have very late nights where the planners would once a week or go and sit and punch their schedules through and run their scheduling tools and see what the outcomes were going to be. Moving more recently, that era is actually continued, and that's something that's continued right through until really we got into sort of the more modern computer era, the 80s and the 90s, as we started to see what I would call the emergence of Industry 4.0. So this was really as we started to shift to building on that individual computer, early day automation, we started to then see the connectivity, and this was really characterized by the internet and linking of systems and networks together. So in the context of where we are now, we're really in this stage of Industry 4.0 and bringing into this technology and the networking. And what we're seeing in this and what it's characterized by is the use of data and automation to drive processes and efficiencies. We've seen it across lots of different industries, and we're increasingly starting to see it in the project space. Another key thing about this particular era is the disruption that is bringing to the industry. It's changing the way we're working. And as a result, we're having to adapt and introduce new technologies, new systems, and new knowledge. So we'll talk about that a little bit further in this presentation. So in terms of Industry 4.0 and the change that it brings, what is the actual problem? Well, what's very interesting about Industry 4.0, as I said, is actually a lot of this, the technology and the tools that we're trying to use and implement when we talk data automation, data analytics, data science, a lot of the technology and tools actually already exist. And yet we don't actually see all the full benefits of some of these tools. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Also, what's interesting is you see a lag in the technology adoption. Those of you who are familiar with the construction industry have probably seen there's been a lot of government research about how to lift the efficiency of the construction industry in particular. Why are we hesitant in certain industries to adapt different technologies? So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Also, the actual acceleration of change over the last 10, 20, 30 years has only gotten more rapid and in all likelihood will continue to evolve. So with that, new ways of working come in. So how do we manage this and what can we do to manage that? And as I said, new technologies continue to be released. So you're going to continue to see this disruption in the short term and the long term. So how do we actually keep up as project controls and project management professionals? So if we have a look at the root causes of some of the challenges in this problem, Sanjay and I have had a look at this and we see three key elements that drive some of the root causes and the challenges when you're trying to manage change in the digital age. So the fundamentals of this being people. So it's easy to forget that ultimately it's people, not machines, that deliver projects. People are not resources, they're humans, okay? So we have to understand the human element of the interaction between people and technology and how they're going to interact with that technology. Process is looking at simply throwing technology at an existing process may not be the right solution. Just because the technology is there doesn't mean it's necessarily the right solution to use. So we need to look at the process holistically and understand what's really at play. And then the third element is the systems themselves. So with so many options available and so many different things and approaches that could be used, are we actually using the right tool for the right task? So we'll touch on that a little bit as well. And on that note, I will pass across to Sanjay to introduce the first of those themes, which was people managing change.
Cool. Thanks, Jay. So when we roll out any changes to systems or processes, what we'll end up noticing is that we actually spend more time and effort with people and stakeholder management, trying to understand why they do what they do, trying to implement ways to motivate them, incentivize them, and trying to upskill them for any new changes that will happen. So if you can move on to the next slide there, Joe. So the first thing is to understand your people. So understand the current behaviors, and what are their attitudes to change in technology? Are they ready for a shakeup? Will change cause stress as they're, if there's other things happening at the same time, will this cause more stress on them? Or are they willing to just keep going and moving on? Try and understand what the user actually, the user of the system or the processes, understand their requirements, understand why rather than what, they have certain requirements. For example, a classic one is, it's easier to copy multiple entries in Excel rather than typing in individual forms in a system. Okay. Also think about the business requirements. The business requirements are quite important because they tend to dictate some of the requirements, but you may also find that they can be the requirements are vastly different between the end user and the business. And you may not be able to actually satisfy both of them. For example, a business may want some extra information about certain things, but it might be difficult for the end user or the user to be able to input that information for the business. And this naturally leads to politics and conflict zones. So identify the politics of organization, and consider external threats as well, like commercial threats, client threats, things like that. Understand your bottlenecks. And so what I mean by bottlenecks is like a lack of resources, for example. So if a system is quick to produce something and you get an output straight away, but if there's few human resources to review the output, then that's going to be a bottleneck. So even though you've sped up a process based on your new system, the overall process may just be as slow. And look out for potential conflicts. So this is any resistance that you may face, or even if somebody else, from another business unit or another project is doing something similar, but maybe having a different approach to that, and they could be conflicting ways to your understanding of how the people are going to manage the processes. And be critical about understanding your team's skill level. Will they be able to understand the new technology? There's no point rolling out a new cost management system, if they don't know the fundamentals of maybe Excel. Will they be able to learn the new systems? So take that into consideration when we're trying to understand people. The next slide there, Jay. And one of the most important things is to try and create that desire for change. So before we can try and create that desire, we need to understand why people fight change in the first place. Sometimes it's mostly about perception. So people think that technology is this additional step. They need to do their current process plus this new process with this technology. They're scared of the steep learning curve required to learn the new process or the new technology. And they're also scared of redundancy. They're scared that the system or the tool will take over their jobs. And then there's also restrictions. So humans by nature are quite fluid. They tend to make mistakes and do and adapt and change. But a system can be a bit more rigid and may prevent them from doing things which may upset them and may not encourage them to change with the tool. So once we understand why people fight that change, we'll try and understand the motivations that we can try and get them. So, systems and new processes are always trying to reduce the workload. So we're trying to get, trying to move repetitive and manual labor away. We're trying to let the systems do a lot of the decision making, so there's less human error involved. And ultimately, and this is something that, to try and appease people who fear, systems overtaking them, is that systems actually give us more times to do the things we enjoy. So, don't take it as they're taking over our roles, but it's actually it gives us more time to do more, important things for the projects, such as analyzing and making the critical decisions that, a computer can't make at this stage. And then finally, we need to try and incentivize them. So, we can use this common carrot stick approach, which is, you reward good behavior and you discourage poor behavior. But you need to also weigh up the immediate pain benefit versus the long-term pain benefit. And as a rule, we sort of live in a world of instant gratification, so there's always going to be a desire for immediate effect or immediate benefit. So just keep that in mind when we talk about some of the implementations in future slides. Next slide there, Joe. Okay, so the key to making sure that your change in systems and change in processes is to let people drive. Okay, so there are two approaches. There is a push versus pull. So the push is top-down telling, but you'll find that you'll get a little bit more resistance from people. It's good for if you need something done quickly. So if you want good for quick actions, there's an immediate threat, so you can push down. But if it's something you want everybody to be engaged in, we need to try and come up with a pull method, which is a bottom-up end user focus. Okay. We have to give people ownership. We need to try and identify some key stakeholders that have appetite for change. And this could be, don't be afraid to use some of your junior members of the team. They tend to be more enthusiastic, because they're just learning the ropes. And then try and get them to influence others as well. So let them become the champions of the change or the tool. Let them be instrumental in developing the process. And if you do find resistance, don't see it as a negative. Resistance is actually a good thing because it means that the stakeholders are actually invested. It's actually more problematic if people don't care. Mm. And it's valid that we we're going to make sure that their concerns are validated. And some of these these adversaries can actually become your strongest champions, because if we can try and fix the issues or try and make them understand their concerns, it actually they can actually turn and become a supporter of what we're doing. And then there's the IKEA effect. Okay, everyone's been to IKEA, I'm hoping. You go there, you buy some flat back furniture, you take it home and you build it yourself with an Allen key. So people are most likely to embrace and value the products if they build it themselves. So it's key to get them involved in this process. Next slide there, Jay. So just to get people on board as well, we need to try and gain their trust. And there's a good quote by Simon Sinek: "People don't buy what you do; they buy why you do it." Okay, so we need to try and define the vision. Why are we doing this? It's always good to be transparent with our own motivations. People don't like to be behind closed doors, not knowing what's going on. Try and give them visibility of how the tool will work or how the process change will work. And set up a feedback loop so that the output from the technology is passed back to them, so they understand what's happening to their data and their information. People are scared to commit because they and engage early on because they're scared about their information and what the change in the system or the change in processes is going to affect their information. So give them that peace of mind by allowing them to see what's happening. Next slide there, Jay. And we need to also try and think about skilling up some people. I mean, obviously, new systems means not everyone's going to understand it, so we need to try and get them to try and understand. Now, people generally won't admit that they don't understand, so it's trying to recognize this, because that's another source of resistance. People fear what they don't understand, and especially at the early stages of our processes, we need to expect errors. We are human, we're not robots. So we need to design a system to expect users to make errors, and we need to try and have the system be as forgiving as possible to give them the chance to try and fix it, or give them a chance to try and learn from that mistake as well. It's always important to upskill your team over time, rather than just a single course. There's no point just putting them in a course and saying, for an hour and say, yep, that's the new system. And remember the 70-20-10 rule. So 70-20-10 rule is 70% of the time is actually by learning and doing it yourself. So getting them involved, being part of the process. 20% of learning is through collaboration, so working with other team members. And 10% is actually from the course themselves. So like any standardized course, you'll only learn about 10%. So if you want to gain quick upskills, we need to try and get them involved and experimenting with the system as early as possible. And what we also forget to realize is that this will actually take time, effort, and resources. It's all about constant reinforcement, to embed change. So you can't expect people to upskill in a month. It'll take 6 months. It may take up to a year, and you'll always be trying to nudge them in the right direction. And like I said already, like you need to engage, let the users engage in the tools as early as possible so they can experiment with it. This gives them an opportunity to actually break the system, which then allows us to then improve on that, and find out if the system is suitable for us as well. And lastly is the KISS principle. Keep it simple. If you have a complicated tool or a complicated process, it's going to be complicated to teach. So keep it as simple as you can. And then therefore it'll be easier for people to skill up. Next slide there, Jay. Okay, now how do we make sure that our teams are flexible and adaptable? Because we know that change is always going to happen and it's going to accelerate. So we need to keep our teams motivated for change. So and one of the ways is to try and just keep them comfortable with change. We need to ensure that any emotions that we have to deal with empathetically. if there's any habitual changes that need to happen, we need to come up with change their behavior. And the idea is to just keep them feeling safe, because if you keep just bombarding them with change, they'll feel like, it's a bit chaotic. So it's trying to keep the change moving, but keep them feeling safe as well. And one of the ways we can do that is through continuous improvement. Let them feed back some of their concerns, and then keep a register of the lessons learned. One good way is also trying to resolve issues quickly. A lot of people are cynical about change, and that's because we never act on any of the feedback they give us. So if you try and resolve any of these feedback issues as quickly as possible, you'll find they'll be less cynical, and we'll move with you. And always keep your guides and documentation updated as much as you can, because if we want them to follow a process, we need to make sure that the documentation that prescribes that to them is also updated. And then, just to reduce confusion as well. Next slide there, Joe.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sanjay. So building on the how we manage change in the context of people, we'll talk a little bit now about the process element of the change and how we manage that aspect of things. So when we're looking at implementing a new process in the context of our data analytics or project controls world, we will need to understand and evaluate the current processes. One of the most common things I've personally come across is the number of times that people don't actually understand the current process. So we need to understand initially, is the process actually defined? Sanjay just mentioned, is it written down? Is it captured somewhere? Or is it just kind of held in people's heads? And then also, are there reasons for the current process? Sometimes what we perceive to be as quite a clunky or complicated system may have very good reason for existing. We often see it from a siloed perspective. We often see it from the point of view of our particular individual component of that system. We don't look at the overall process as a whole. So we need to be conscious of that when we are looking at changing our processes and systems and embedding these new technologies in our ways of working. Also, when we do, having done that, are there inefficiencies in that process? Manufacturing industry is rife with the recognition that anything we can do that isn't adding value to the process can be improved upon, and therefore the overall system efficiencies can be adapted. So we want to think systematically when we're looking at our processes. Another thing that's very interesting in this is we're often, as humans, very quick to attribute blame to people, process, or tools. We'll blame the individual because they're not doing it right. We'll blame the process because it's too hard, or we'll blame the tool and say that it just doesn't do what it should do. My experience, I find it's usually not that simple. Very rarely I find that people go out of their way to deliberately be difficult. There are the odd exceptions. Usually, though, there are multiple causes for problems and challenges, and there's often root causes underneath it that we really need to dig into and explore. Is the reason why people aren't using that particular tool because it's too cumbersome, or it doesn't work, or they don't understand it, or they don't know what they've got to do? Is it because the process isn't achieving what it's supposed to do in the first place? Or is it because the tools simply aren't the right tools and they're doing the best they can? So again, we can have multiple causes of those challenges. So we need to look at those and then look at whether we can add, remove, or simplify some of those when we implement our process. And then thirdly, on this element, look at whether that actual system updated is actually required. Changing the process doesn't necessarily make it more efficient. There might be very good reason for doing it, but it may not make the overall process efficient. So we need to take that into consideration and recognize actually that sometimes the change can actually complicate things rather than simplify it. Again, can be for very good reason, but we need to be conscious of that and actually communicate why we're doing that, which is again why that vision becomes so important. So in terms of planning your new process strategy, we really need to understand the bigger picture. What is it that the project and the business process is actually going to achieve? We need to be clear and understand what we're trying to do from the outset and communicate that to our teams. Communicate the vision of what we're trying to do. People need to understand that they're a part of something bigger, particularly if we're going to ask them to do above and beyond what they already do. So we need them to buy into that bigger vision. Anticipate what processes you may need in the future. Change is inevitable. We're going to keep changing. We all know every time we install something, something else comes along. So we need to be conscious of those changes and have an element of future proofing or the ability to adapt whatever we're trying to implement to cope with some of that change where we can. From there, we can then plan how we're actually going to get there. You know, what are the stepping stones? Sanjay touched before on the importance of those short-term goals and milestones versus the longer-term objectives. So the stepping stones can really help us build the momentum, help people, particularly in the earlier stages of the implementation, see things getting momentum and help them better engage because they start to see some of those easy wins on the board or the early wins on the board. And recognize when you do your plan, have your long-term objective, but recognize you're going to probably have to take detours or ultimately go backwards. I mean, I've personally experienced a number of situations where it's the case sometimes of 2 steps forward, 1 steps back in order to get to your destination. You don't see that as a frustration. That's actually a part of the change process, and it's actually a part of the engagement and the ownership piece. You know, recognize that what we do isn't going to be perfect from the outset, and we need to be flexible and adapt to that. Sometimes you may have to take a sideways step in order to allow people to kind of catch up or to take on board feedback from different teams.
Yeah, a good analogy for this is driverless cars. So the driverless cars, you know, there's a vision, you know, that in the future that we're going to have driverless cars. But the stepping stones to get there, you know, are things that we take for day to day at the moment in the cars, like cruise control. We've got lane keep assistance, automatic braking, pedestrian car collision avoidance systems, even smart motorways, all part of the stepping stones to get to the vision of driverless cars. You know, and it's just there to help people see the shorter term wins, and it's also to get us used to the idea of the new process.
Yeah, definitely, Sanjay. It's a fantastic example. So again, when we're thinking about change, we need to think of it in the context in our implementation strategies, evolution versus revolution. We can be incredibly disruptive in the change that we're seeking to implement. A lot of the project data analytics is going to have incredible changes and revolutionary impact, I think, on our industry and the project delivery space. But the way we implement it should be thought of more in an evolutionary sense. So big changes to processes can be daunting and very unsettling for us. They can cause confusion and resistance. I think we can also talk firsthand in the last 18 months how challenging it has been given the revolutionary circumstances we've found ourselves in, and adapting. The fact that we're even holding this conference the way we are, I think 18 months ago probably would have been seen as unheard of. So, you know, the sorts of changes, and when we have these revolutionary changes, it can be very hard for people to adapt to and can cause a lot of conflict and challenge. People need to learn new processes, and that can cause some inefficiencies. And we can often lose knowledge and expertise from the current process when we make revolutionary changes, rather than recognizing some of those things that be taken forward. The old don't throw the baby out with the bathwater sort of scenario. Make small changes to the process at a time. Even though you might have a revolutionary goal, remember that goal, but use the stepping stones to get there so that people have time to go on that journey with you. As the implementer or as the leaders of this change, we're often forget that we live and breathe the stuff. So we're often at the cutting edge of this thing. People need the opportunity to catch up with us and go on that journey with us if we're going to be successful and embed it. Ideally, change a small process for quick benefits early. This will help people get used to what you're trying to do or see, maybe get a bit of a flavor for what we're trying to do. It also helps create some of the momentum for the change so that we can carry things forward through some of those harder periods. If you do want to make a revolutionary change, you'll often need to create a drastic desire for change. Usually this tends to happen if there's an imminent problem or threat. And again, I'm going to cite the construction industry here on this one just because it's my personal area that I tend to work in. But the idea again of running sort of how much of the projects in the last 18 months have shifted virtually would have been unheard of 18 months ago had we not gone through this huge shakeup that we've all been through in this last 18 months. So it's a really good example of that immediate threat problem driving that revolutionary change. Build good behavior through simple and easy to follow processes. Sanjay touched on this before, but again, people tend to take a path of least resistance. So if we give them an option to do something an easy way and we give them an option to do it a hard way, most of us are going to take the easy way. So this can actually be used though to our advantage. We can set the new system up so it's easier. It actually involves less effort or there's less resistance to it. And we can actually then use it as well to our advantage to make undesired behaviors or processes harder to do. So for example, maybe if we're moving budgets around and things like that, simple things like having a form you have to fill in order to implement that change makes it that little bit harder. Therefore, people actually stop and think about whether they want to do it or not. Keep your processes fluid. Again, they're going to keep evolving and changing. You're going to have to keep updating the process. This isn't a case of write the process and move on. This isn't a tick box exercise when we're implementing change. Change is a continual process. So you need to know your goal, but how you get there should be flexible. Acknowledge if a new process is not working. Not everything we do is going to work from the outset. So sometimes you are going to have to roll back or have a backup process. And where things aren't working, be honest about it, be visible about it, and invite the discussion about how to improve it or fix it. Again, this ties in with your lessons learned, your continuous improvement model that we're all very familiar with. But again, it's all very important because it's about that ownership piece and the engagement piece of in order to get that process embedded longer term. And then along the way, where we get requests for more changes, inevitably we get scope creep in any project that we implement. Look for easy wins. If there's easy value adds that you can add into your change to make it a little less painful for people, or to make it perhaps the benefits a little bit more visible, include them where you can. Little things like that can make a big difference, particularly in the early stages. And so with that, I will move across to Sanjay to bring us home with the systems element.
Yeah, so systems is the last thing you need to think about out of this. So we put this last, and we're going to touch it because systems are going to vary from different projects to projects, but you're going to spend most of your time with people and processes. And then we're going to try and select the right tool, and we're going to figure out how we're going to deploy that. Okay, so Joe, next slide. Okay, so selecting the right tool. As you know, there may be too many options. So what we need to do is, because we've understood the people, we've understood the processes, we can try and pick a product to meet those requirements. We need to understand, is this tool going to be our final tool that we're going to use for the strategic goal? Or is this going to be an interim tool that we're going to use as a stepping stone to reach our final goal? Does the tool meet the current average skill level? Or is it easy to upskill everybody to be able to use the tool? And weigh up the advantages and disadvantages, because not all tools are going to be perfect. You don't have a perfect tool for your system unless you're going to fork out a lot of money to pay for a bespoke system. So, weigh up the advantages and disadvantages, and look for a system that provides you more advantages, obviously. And what you need to try and do is appreciate and let the team also appreciate the main function of the tool, because a lot of resistance comes because there's some expectations of the technology. So some people expect the technology to do more than it is capable of. Some people think there's just one button that you can press and then everything happens. And then on the flip side, there's people who underestimate what the technology can do. They think they can do better than what the technology can do. So let them understand and appreciate the system or the tool that you're going to use. Try and figure out what the limits of the systems are as well, because you need to know, are there restrictions to the inputs or outputs of the system? Because we need to make sure that the people and the processes can align to the limits of the system as well. So like sometimes the limits or the restrictions on the systems can help us, because it might restrict users from doing something. But when we're trying to deploy a tool early on, we may want to keep it less restrictive, so that it gives them a chance to make those mistakes and learn from that, so to reinforce the good behaviors. Next slide there, Joe. And we've covered a lot of this before, but when we're trying to deploy the system, you've got to remember, we've got to keep the deployment quick, to realize the benefits as early as possible. We need to try and keep the system flexible, again, trying to encourage errors so that people will learn from it and reinforce the good behaviors. And also, it also tests the system. Let them break the system, so it gives us a chance to try and see if the tool is right for us, and do we need to change the tool. As we continue using the tool, or we're experimenting with the tool, we can refine the processes. And then once we get to a stage where we're stable, then we can try and increase the restrictions. As the people start learning the good behaviors, we can increase the restrictions to make sure that the data and information is correct, for future outputs.
Definitely.
Next slide, Jay. Okay, so that actually concludes our presentation. So in conclusion, as the digital age actually evolves, there's going to be lots of new stuff coming: data science, automation, there's AI, and who knows what else will come in the future. And this will always try and disrupt and change the way we deliver projects. Okay, so we've explored the 3 key areas that we need to manage. That's people, process, and tools, or systems. And we've addressed some of the key challenges that we face to help you deliver your projects and your business processes and systems.
Fantastic.
And we'll just open up the forum for any questions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sanjay. So Greg, I'll throw it across to you. I think you've been kindly looking at the questions in the background. I don't know if we've had any kind of dialogue on the chat channel there or what's come through. So
yes, there are 2 questions that have come through into the questions and 1 in the chat. I'll start off with the question that's on leadership and governance. So it says, I have noticed that there has been no reference to leadership within your slides on people. In my experience, leadership and governance are commonality of messaging around the change initiative are key throughout the organization. Therefore, leadership at all levels is key. Any thoughts?
I would absolutely echo that. And you're quite right. We didn't touch on it specifically in the presentation, but when you set that, we touched a little bit on setting the vision, I guess the ultimate benefits and outcome. To me, that leadership buy-in and engagement with that vision that you're setting out is absolutely imperative, because if you don't have the leadership support, and sometimes you need their weight, their authority, their support to lend you the ability to drive through the change and to help with the momentum. So I would absolutely echo that point. I think it's a very valid point. So.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, I think we did sort of discussed it in the business user requirements, but yeah, specifically leadership. I mean, yeah, in my experience, leadership is just as hard to win over as the team itself as well, because they've got restrictions. And again, it's trying to understand why. Again, it's motivation. Why is leadership reluctant for change, or reluctant for or resisting? What you're trying to do. What's the bigger goal in their minds? So it's trying to understand what their ultimate goal is. Is it are they trying to do something, or is the business as a whole, or are they dictated by clients? So things like that you need to try and understand as well. So
and equally, why are they supportive of change? If there's a change that they're keen to push through as well, what's the driver behind that? So yeah, definitely I would completely echo the sentiments there, Greg.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
Just to be fair to you both, you did touch across that with you both used the word why there, and with the reference to Simon Sinek earlier on. So start with why. Moving on to the second question. So this one touches upon competence, but also development. Just scroll down to it. It says, how much do you agree with the statement that disciplines of change management and project management are both necessary when executing a project or initiative? How can we move towards more effective training and qualification structure to cover both?
Shall I take this one, Sanjay, or do you want to?
You can go first.
Thanks for that. I thought you preempted me. I think what's really interesting about the data analytics, data science, and the future of project controls is, and I come back to my introduction a little bit with this one, is that this is something actually that project controls has been doing since the 50s. I don't think we fully appreciate that we've been doing it. Project controls is quite often about change management. I don't mean commercial change when I say that. I mean very much about behavioral change. I think we sometimes overlook that in the context that we're often looking at numbers and earned value and all that good stuff that we do. But a big part of it is about actually changing people's behaviors. And so I think we often do it without fully appreciating that we're doing it. I think those of us who've been in the career for a long time increasingly recognize that project controls is what I'd say a very soft power discipline. We're very reliant on other parties to help us with whatever it is that we're trying to do. We don't usually have the authority in and of ourselves to dictate how people will work or operate. But in terms of embedding it more into the systems, I think things like accreditation within, the APM and the project management kind of qualifications is a great place to start, because increasingly what I love seeing is that there is reference to change management in a lot of the newer updates of the project management philosophies and theories, a lot more reference to things like agile and that type of thing, and recognizing some of those newer techniques coming out of other industries. And then obviously building on those certifications and including that soft skills training or leadership training for managers who are going to be leading this type of work, in sort of allowing them the opportunity to do sort of change management type training and leadership based training would be my answer to that one, Greg. Sanjay, I don't know if you want to add to that or.
Yeah, it's a tough one, because it's all well and good to try and like teach all the management side of things, like, so, people who are in project management or change management, we can do all the effective training and qualifications to get them to understand. But what we're trying to emphasize in our presentation is actually not just the management side, but the rest of the team. How do we take them with us in that journey? So it's all well and good that we understand change management and project management and how to, but it's how do we, in turn get, every person, all the stakeholders involved to come on that journey. And that's a little bit like, we've addressed some of that in our slides, but, it is a little bit more difficult. And unfortunately, we don't have like, I know Jay can talk about behavioral science all day, but, you need to do a degree in psychology to try and understand how everyone behaves. But yeah, that's where we are.
I think it's a really valid point. I think one thing as project controls professionals, we're often very focused on the outputs and the actual task. And I think, again, and Sanjay touched on this in his people slides, but we've got to remember there is a human element to this and an emotional element within that. And we've got to be cognizant of that. We don't necessarily have to know absolutely everything about it, but you've got to recognize that and deal with it empathetically and recognize we're humans, not robots. So,
yeah.
Just conscious of time, we've had two more questions. So just quickly, almost like a question time sum up. Is the argument for a centralized or enterprise PMO now greater than ever? And the second question was, how do we engage employees who are very happy using tools which we are trying to phase out? A bit of a legacy issue on that last one.
I like that one. Sanjay, do you want to do that one? Or?
I'll jump on the first question by Robert. Is the argument for centralized? That sort of argument, again, like I said, the system and the tools is the last of your arguments. The first argument is your people and getting them on board, and the processes and getting that change. Now, like, I'm not going to pick on whether centralized or enterprise PMO, including the IT systems. Is there a need for that argument? There probably is going to be a need for that argument, but I don't think it's going to be the main argument. Okay, and just on Laura's question, how do we engage employees who are very happy using tools? If they're happy using tools, again, it's that going back to the why. Why are they happy using tools? So why are we trying to phase it out? I mean, just because a new software is coming out, I know, there might be questions of like, we're going to lose support on the old software. But just because the new software solutions come out, again, it's that, are they going to be the right tools to use? So if they are happy with what they're using, maybe try and find a tool that's similar to what they're using. Again, it's that evolutionary. Maybe just change one portion of it as they evolve to the next one, rather than just doing a full change or phasing them out from one to another, if it's possible. Obviously, some of these might not be possible, but just try and think about, again, it's that why do they like their old product, and try and think about how they can, why, if they like that old product, then they'll definitely like this new product sort of attitude.
I think that's a really good point, Sanjay, because again, if there's something in particular in that old product that maybe that's particularly tying them to it or making them go, no, I really like this because it does X, really good way to try and move them across in that incremental change to see if you can duplicate that function in the new tool. Like if it's a business directive that this new tool will be rolled out, look at the way of, well, is there ways that we can duplicate some of those things that people like so it feels more familiar and more comfortable when they move across? You basically, again, it's that path of least resistance thing again of going, well, how do you make it as easy as possible for that person to shift across to that new tool? Bear in mind that you're asking them to change, and people don't resist change, they resist being changed. So it's about understanding what is the behavior there that they are concerned that they're going to have to change. Can you actually duplicate that behavior for them in the new tool and help facilitate that transition for them so it's easier and smoother, and you're probably more likely to have success, would be what my addition to that, to Sanjay's answer. So yeah, Greg, I think does that cover us off?
Yeah, I think that wraps it up. There's been some feedback in the chat. Thank you for your responses. I know the next session's not starting till 12. But I'd probably just say it was a question in the chat, but you could ask it to everyone. And it was, what was your last IKEA style outcome? So that's one for everyone to take home and think about.
I think my experience with IKEA is I always seem to have a box of bits left over and I never quite know what to do with them, but I'm sure I'm not alone in that one.
I love IKEA. I mean, I love putting things together and breaking them. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. I hope that was informative, and thank you for your attendance then. So.
Thanks to Sanjay and Jay. Brilliant.